So let me introduce our final speaker for today, our very own Professor Klaus-Dieter. He is the Venerable Yuan Hang Memorial Trust Professor in Buddhist Studies here at the University of Hong Kong. He obtained his PhD from Marburg University in 1994 with a study of the Yoga Chara text, which I always have trouble when I read it. It is the Dhamma Dhammata Vibhaga, yes. And from 1993 to 2001, he served as the director of the Nepal Research Center and the Nepal German Manuscript Preservation Project in Kathmandu. Prior to joining HKU in August 2023, he held the position of head of the Department of South Asian, Tibetan, and Buddhist Studies at the University of Vienna. His current research focuses on inclusivism, exclusivism, and tolerance in Mahayana. He and his team organized the 2014 conference of the International Association of Buddhist Studies, demonstrating his involvement and contribution to the academic community. He has published notable works, such as A Direct Path to the Buddha Within, Golotawa's Mahamudra interpretation of the Ratna Gotra Vibhaga, A Fine Blend of Mahamudra and Madhyamaka, Maitripa's collection of texts on non-conceptual realization, and as well, most recently in 2024, co-authored with Peter Daniel Santo, Sahara's Spontaneous Songs, together with Advaya Vajara's and Mokshara Gupta's Commentaries. That's with Wisdom, published in 2024. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Professor Martis.
Oh, there's another one, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. The older you get, the more difficult it is to introduce a speaker. But you did very well. Thank you very much. And here is my PowerPoint.
Red spot.
Yeah, so it's, yeah, okay, thank you. So my talk is on the significance of the meditation tradition for the formation of religious identities. And I first start with a short overview. I'm going to talk about religious identities in general, like school affiliation versus transmission lineages. Then I talk about the meditation tradition, the Gomluk, also known as Zenluk. And then I compare the transmission lists, like the meditation tradition and the Shentong transmission lineage, which has very many similarities to the meditation tradition. And then finally, we will look at Khyungka Drolchok's Shentong lineage in the 100 Chonang instructions, Chonang Chikya. So mostly I'm following a phonetic transcription of the Tibetan, because I thought, this is not a group of Tibetologists, and so at least you can read the names. And the Tibetologists, they figure out, what the Wylie would be anyway. So lineages of philosophical interpretation and practice tell us more about a Tibetan master than his school affiliation. So masters could hold and teach different conflicting theories. And my former teacher, Khenpo Tsuldim Gyamtso Rinpoche, he said, well, for as long as you study Sautrantika, try to be a Sautrantika. So when you study mind only, try to be like a follower of mind only. For as long as you study Madhyamaka, uphold the view or try to defend the view of Madhyamaka. And that was not only a good advice, for me as a student, but it told me also a lot about Tibetan tradition and the way Tibetan masters go about different transmissions they have received. Yeah. And thoroughly knowing and even teaching a philosophical teaching or a hermeneutic system does not necessarily mean adhering to it ultimately. Kongtrul Lodro Taye, who is Nyingma Kakyu, wrote Bön texts contributing to the transmission of Dragpa Bön, while not being considered a Bönpo, at least not in Shechen or Pelpung, where he spent most of his life. And according to Gyalo Tsawa's biography, written by the fourth Shamapa Chögyal Dragpa, Tsongkhapa also taught a distinction between nitata and neata, relative or interpretable meaning and definitive meaning based on the Uttara Tantra. And Gyaltsaba followed that. I mean, that's quite intriguing because, the Gelugpas, they normally don't follow like the Buddha nature teaching when it comes to distinguishing definitive and provisional meaning. Yeah, but Tsongkhapa still, he could explain, the definitive meaning based on Buddha nature teaching. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily mean that he ultimately followed that, but he studied that and he could transmit it and he could teach it. Yeah, and I just give a further example which is relevant to the discussion of transmission lineages. The binding factor of Shentong. Shentong is a controversial interpretation of Madhyamaka, which means, that the ultimate is only empty of other, but not empty of its own ultimate qualities. So there is some kind of Buddha qualities and primordial awareness or luminosity, which remains ultimately and is not empty, but it's only empty of ordinary states of consciousness. So this transmission of Shentong happened in the 17th and 18th century, and the Chonang Trubchen Kunsang Wangpo was a teacher who is a Chonangpa. He was a teacher of the Nyingmapa scholar Katok Ritsin Sewang Norbu, who was himself a teacher of the Kamakakyu 8th Taisitu Penchen Chigi Chungne. And Shentong was going through these masters. And when determining the religious identity of Situ Penchen, a philosophical lineage that spread across the traditional Tibetan schools, is as important as his Kamakakyu affiliation. So some Pelpung masters, the monastery you see here is Pelpung in the Dage County, in present-day Sichuan. They followed the Shentong interpretation, or many followed the Shentong interpretation of Situ Penchen, and they had more in common with his lineage transmitted by a Chonang and a Nyingma master than with other fellow Kamakakyu scholars. So in determining Situ, you would not say, oh, he's a Kamakakyu and therefore he has this and that identity, but what matters is the transmission lineage he received, in terms of philosophy. So it's more the transmission lineage which determines a religious identity rather than his school affiliation. So that's one of my observations. And now I'm going to speak about the meditation tradition itself. Gelong Chöshe wrote the Uttara Tantra commentary. It's a standard Indian commentary on Buddha nature. And he is one of the earliest who mentions the transmission lineage through Satchana, the Indian Kashmiri master Satchana, and who was teaching the Uttara Tantra and other Maitreya works to Sugave Dorje and Tsen Kabuche. Yeah. So in fact, Tsen Kabuche requested the teaching, and Sugave Dorje acted as a translator. So, and Chöshe identifies himself as belonging to the meditation tradition and takes the Buddha nature teaching literally without trying to align it with the second Dhamma chakra and Madhyamaka. Yeah. So, further about the meditation tradition, we get information in Kongtrul's commentary tradition of the Uttara Tantra, where we read, Satchana taught all 5 Maitreya works with Sugave Dorje acting as a translator. He also imparted the instructions on the Uttara Tantra, the Gyula Medampa. Tsen Drime Sherab thus went to Tibet and explained them in Yu and Sang. This was also famous as the meditation tradition of the Maitreya works. I will come back to this description of the meditation lineage in Kongtrul's commentary on the Uttara Tantra in a minute. But the important thing I have to mention here is that the instructions on the Uttara Tantra were not just oral instructions, but when the first set of the Kadam Songbom came out, I discovered in this collection the instructions on the Uttara. Sorry, it was in the second set, which came out a few years later, 2008. And there was a text called the Instructions of the Uttara Tantra. And it is a written text and not only an oral instruction. And this text contains a lot of important information on the transmission lineage of the meditation school or tradition. And in the colophon of these instructions on the Uttara Tantra, we find that it is transmitted by the Kadamba abbot Kyoten Mönlam Tsultrim and written down by the abbot disciple Seyuche Gyaltsen. In the final section, at the end of the text, we find the Uttara Tantra was not rediscovered by Maitripa, but he only dreamt of having received this text together with the Dhamma Vibhaga. So that's a quite interesting additional piece of information. And we have also in the colophon transmission lineage described. And it goes the normal thing. Well, it was first taught, the Uttara Tantra, by Maitreya, as maintained by all Mahayana Buddhist traditions. Then, Maitripa somehow rediscovered it or received the teachings in a dream. Then it was passed on to Ananda Kirti, Akasha Shanti, Sachana, Sugave Dorje, and then Tsen Kaboche, just as also explained by Geshe Chöshye. And then there's somebody from Lateux, which I could not identify, Dopanyen, and then the 8th abbot of Natang, Kyoten Mönlam Tsultrim. And now, when we compare that to another text in the Kadam Songbom, the instructions on the Dhamma Vibhaga, we get exactly the same guys, more or less. And then, to my surprise, when I looked at Taranatha's Sapmo Shentong Umekyudep, the supplication to the lineage of the profound Shentong Madhyamaka, wow, it's exactly the same people, and so it means, the Chunang Pass or the Shentong Pass, the followers of Shentong somehow appropriated this meditation tradition. So that's a quite interesting finding. And now filling the gaps, in this transmission lineage, from different namtas and other sources, we gather that Kyoten Mönlam Tsultrim and his disciple Rik Bereldri received Uttara Tantra teachings from Chim Namka Trak, who was the 7th abbot of Natang. And Mönlam Tsultrim states in his records of teachings heard that he received 3 Uttara Tantra traditions, the ones of Chapa, Marpa, and Sugave Dorje, who is the one who transmitted the meditation tradition. And Mönlam Tsultrim also received Uttara Tantra instructions from Rinchen Ö, one of his important teachers. And Rik Bereldri received teachings on the 5 Maitreya works from Chim Namka Trak. In other words, all these small details which don't tell you anything probably because you hear these guys the name of these guys for the first time. But to sum up this slide, there is a seamless transmission of the meditation tradition in Natang. Now, Natang Monastery, that's Kadamba, and the meditation lineage, being incorporated by the Shentong Pass, and they citing the same people, that would mean that Shentong was transmitted, in one of the most important centers of Kadamba learning, at Natang Monastery, which is very surprising. And the first time I presented that, at a Tibetan Studies conference, the Gelug professors from the United States were really surprised and couldn't believe it. Because they somehow assume, that the old Kadambas are a little bit like the Gelugpas, and not very different. But anyway, you see, what you suddenly discover, when you look at transmission lineages. So like the school affiliation doesn't tell you very much. Yeah, it's just the lineage, the transmission, which counts. And then, we have Kongtrul Lutrataye, and because of time restrictions, I have to point out just the main things. He mentions the same guys, yeah, like Sachana, Sugabe Dorje, Tsenkapoche, and then of course, he adds in some Karma Kakyu masters, like the third Karmapa, Karma Könshön, Karma Trinlepa, who were closely related to the fourth and the later Karmapas. And he mentions also Gyalotsawa composed an expanded commentary on Asanga's commentary on the Uttara Tantra. So that was my habilitation thesis. I was if you're interested, it's called The Buddha Within and Direct Path to the Buddha Within. And interestingly, Kongtrul also mentions the Chonang Pass, but he says, well, it's a little bit extraordinary. It's a little bit separate. So he was aware, of subtle doctrinal distinction between the meditation tradition and the Shantong tradition of the Chonang Pass. But still, this is a context. In this context, the Chonang transmission is also mentioned. Yeah. Now, meditation tradition and Shantong. How can the followers of Shantong take over the masters of the meditation tradition? I mean, that's a question I got, after reading and examining this material. And we get a good idea from Situ's answer to questions by Tulku Karma Tupten Nawang. That's in the question and answer section of the collected works of Situ Chögyechungne. Well, it's a little bit later, but it gives you a good idea, of what the representatives of the meditation tradition and the Shantong tradition considered, to be the criteria for a Shantong Pa. And I just summarize, according to Situ, you're a Shantong Pa, a follower of Shantong, a follower of a Madhyamaka interpretation which accepts some ultimate Buddha qualities. If you follow the Sandinya Mochana Sutra, which is the basic Yogacara Sutra and basis for Yogacara hermeneutics and the third Dhammachakra. If you take the Uttara Tantra and Buddha nature teachings literally, by the word, if you accept that Nagarjuna's collections of hymns accord with Asanga's intent, and that's of course a little bit, but when you read, the hymns, like the Dhammadhatu Stotra or the Achintya Stava, you indeed find positive descriptions of the ultimate. While the other question is, was that really taught by Nagarjuna? But that's rather an Indological historical question. For a follower of the Tibetan tradition, there was no question. They would accept that the four hymns are by Nagarjuna. Seifert Rüegg even published once a paper saying that the kernel, the core of the hymns, were by Nagarjuna himself. Well, in any case, it doesn't matter for the Tibetan discussion here. And then, you follow Chandrakirti only when you are doing philosophy, and you accept your meditation experience that emptiness is replete with all supreme aspects. Yeah, so once you have a direct realization of your Buddha nature, don't go back to philosophy and try to refute, your own experience, because direct, immediate experience is more valid than inference, So if you're experiencing the bliss of Buddhahood, and some logician, tries to convince you that you didn't experience it, well, you of course trust your own experience, right? Now, okay, if we go by these criteria, the eighth Situ Pension, Chungne, can of course say that guys like Ratnakara Shanti, Maitripa, Mapa upheld the Shantong Madhyamaka view which is usually referred to as false aspectarian mind only, Alikakara, Vijnanavada in India and Tibet. So like in this kind of Alikakaravada, the Buddha retains in his non-dual luminous realization false aspects of perceived and perceiver in order to be able to act in the world. So, well, that's according to Situ, and we find that in a question and answer, like in the Situ Sungbom. Now, like going through these people, who are mentioned by Situ, well, Maitripa, he has an analytical approach, of deconstructing, when you are doing philosophy, when you are analytically analyzing what appears to a conceptual mind, okay, and but he explains also the direct experience of Buddha nature positively. So he combines both these things, and that's why I think Situ is correct in doing that. And now I have been told I only have 1 minute left. Well, there is some quite interesting dialogue between Maitreya and Maitripa, which shows that the ultimate is also described positively. The same we have with Gyalotsawa Shenupel. You have a negation of everything when you are doing intellectual analysis, but you have a direct experience of Buddha qualities in meditation. So all these qualify, so to say, as followers of Shentong according to Situ's understanding. And there's maybe just give me 1 extra minute and then I finish. There is some very interesting observation made by Kama Phuntsok from Bhutan, who recently published a huge book on Kyoten Mönlam Tsultrim, and he enlightened us that among the Kadambas there were the followers of textual exegesis, like the Shungpa, and there were followers of pith instructions. And now when you look at philosophical works like Kyoten's commentary on the Abhisamaya Lankara, he follows Haribhatra and the Rangtong interpretation of Haribhatra. And then, but as a Menakpa, as somebody who transmits pith instructions, he has written texts which are very much in favor of Shentong. So it means, that Kyoten, he could, just uphold a Rangtong view and deconstruct everything as Rangtong, as empty of inherent existence. But he could also give Shentong teachings or teachings similar to Shentong. And it depends, which lineage he's following. And so again, transmission lineage is important and not, school affiliation. And I have to stop here in order to give some time for question and answer. And so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Martis. We have about 10 minutes for questions.
Thank you for your presentation, and I am utterly naive in almost every regard about it, so please forgive my question. But I just wanted to perhaps challenge or push back a little bit about this claim, which may or may not be true. I have no idea, because as I said, I'm a layman in this, about that somehow school affiliation is to be entirely divorced from one's scholastic viewpoint or one's philosophical or religious identity, is what you said. And I just wondered, is this perhaps not a rather ahistorical way of looking at how an individual comes to a set of teachings? So, for instance, just very concretely, certain schools must have access to certain texts and certain ideas and give privilege to certain texts and certain ideas at specific moments. And therefore, if a teacher one day, prefers to follow a Yogacara or a Sautrantika position, and then in 10 years' time pursues a Madhyamaka perspective, are there not concrete reasons for this? And therefore, do these principles of philosophy not become ideology in an institutional context? Are they not taught as maybe even just for the fact of it being a particular kind of philosophy, which is an ideology, and therefore taught as such as having a particular power or dominance over other ideas? So I just wondered if there's actually, you want to separate the two quite clearly, but I wondered if it's a bit more muddled in reality.
Well, thank you. You are raising some very, very interesting points, and I try to address them in a very short time, because we would have to discuss very long about that. I would say, we know Tibetan Buddhism from modern, 21st or end of 20th century, and we were always going around, are you Gelugpa, are you Pakyupa, are you Nyingmapa? So that was for us, the marker, the identity marker.
Sorry, Professor.
And so I was surprised, when doing historical studies and looking at older texts, that this school affiliation didn't matter so much. I'm not saying a transmission or identity based on transmission is opposed to school affiliation. No, I'm not saying that. I'm only saying that a particular transmission of a philosophy, but that could be also of a meditation technique or a tantra or whatever, or even Vinaya. Yeah, that could be more decisive, to describe a master rather than saying he's a Kamakakyu or he's a Nyingma. Yeah, so that was my point. Yeah, and I was simply surprised to find out that myself, and then it got supported by the findings of Kama Punsok, with his study of Kyoten Mönlam Tsultrim. So that again, I put things into perspective, because at some point we were surprised, he has written texts which support Shentong, but then we found out he has only a transmission of special instructions, and in this context he's teaching Shentong. But he has also a transmission of philosophy, and in this context he's teaching something else. So what I'm saying, is that the transmission of teachings you have received, and the whole set of teachings you have received, that's more decisive in defining an identity of a master. Yeah.
Very briefly, sort of add to that discussion, and I agree that to look at this from also a historical perspective would be very interesting, because I see that you are looking at an earlier period where things, I do feel you're right, things are less fixed. But then, and others are doing very good work on this. When you get to the 17th century, then you actually have a curriculum in the monasteries especially that becomes more and more fixed. And I feel, and someone should really look into this in some more detail, this is when things start to change, where you have less flexibility in terms of a scholastic positioning. And of course, then things change again when the Rime movement happens. But it would be very interesting to look at this from a sort of a longue durée of, scholastic and philosophical flexibility.
Well, thank you again for pointing that out. And I didn't have a chance, to go through all these different layers, like what happened in the 14th, 15th, up to the 17th century. But you're right. In the 14th, 15th century, everything was much more fluid. And when we read Namtas, the one of Gyalo Sawashan Upel, he felt absolutely free, to meet any like master like of any affiliation and get teachings from whoever. So that was a kind of standard like behavior of a scholar in the 14th or 15th century. But things in the 17th, of course, were different. Yeah, but the reason I talked about Situ, because he received a Shantong transmission from other schools, from the Chonang Pass through the Nyingma and the Kakyu, and this kind of transmission which he taught at Pelpong, was very important for Pelpong Monastery. But the curriculum, yeah, and let's say you became a nun or a monk in Pelpong Monastery, you were fixed by the curriculum, of course. You didn't have this freedom, of course not. So you had to really go through that. But the thing is, when you ask, what identifies, or what is the identity of Pelpong curriculum and teaching, then you would say this transmission lineage coming from Katok Rising Sewang Norbu and the Chonang ultimately is at least as important to define the identity than being Karma Kakyu. Because you go to other Karma Kakyu institutions and you would have a completely different curriculum. And also for the Nyingma Pass, the Katok Lamas, they often support Shantong, but you go to other Namtraling, or you talk to modern Nyingma Pass, they are really opposed to that. Yeah, so there is a real opposition in philosophy and Madhyamaka and many other things within the Nyingma school. And what is more important than being Nyingma is whether you are trained in Katok Monastery or whether you are trained in Namtraling Monastery. So again, it's a question of transmission lineages. And Rime, I think if we start talking about Rime, we have to cancel dinner.
If I may just to add something on this. Well, we do have the fifth Dalai Lama, for example, who had Dzogchen lineages. And just recently, I had a very good friend, a Khenpo, a Bonpo Khenpo, who went to Trangpo Rinpoche's teachings. And when I queried, I said, why are you going to attend transmissions and teachings from Trangpo Rinpoche? His response was, because he's a Buddha. And I thought that was a very interesting response, even though he comes from a completely, arguably for some people, not even a Buddhist school, if the Bon are not considered Buddhist. So just what to your presentation.
Thank you. You could add up a lot of more examples. And I just wanted to somehow forward this working thesis of looking more at transmission lineages. I'm not saying school affiliation is not important, but I'm saying that transmission lineage is as important when it comes to philosophy and also tantric lineages.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very inspiring presentation too. I just wanted to, it's not really a question, but something to confirm. Your viewpoint is that when we are studying the transmission of Tibetan Buddhism among the Tangus, which is 11th, 12th century, which is actually the earliest we have, and just as you said, there is not even a word for a school, yeah? We don't know what would be in Tangut, like Nyingma or Kagyu. The only word there is Kadampa, but it's also in Gampopa's biography where he's telling that the Kadampa instructions are very important. So really, but that at the same time we have a variety of lineages which are just, as you said, they're concentrated around the specific practices, like Mahamudra and whatnot. So just exactly the transmission, the lineage was much more important than a very abstract school affiliation, which basically wasn't even existent. At least the Tangus, they were not aware of that. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I thank you also for this remark. And today I gathered from your talk also an important piece of information that Chandrakirti is somehow missing, on good material.
Yes, quite a bad reputation.
Even that, yeah. But that again, it shows, a preference, for certain transmissions of, let's say, rather Svatantrika Madhyamaka or Yogacara Madhyamaka over maybe prasangika, yeah? And it's not so much, like whether it is a question of kakyu or whatever, it's simply like a preference of a textual interpretation transmission. It just adds up to that. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think as you said, this conversation could go on a long time, but we will have to wrap it up here. So please, once again, let's give a thanks to Professor Ma.
Thank you.
Thank you once again for the insightful presentation of Professor Irina Urbaneva, Venerable Tenzin Chochen, and Professor Mates in this session. And we are also, of course, very thankful to Professor Hardy for being with us the whole day to introduce our speakers and moderate the Q&A sessions. I would like to express our gratitude once again to all our speakers today for their inspiring sharing. We hope there will be a chance for us to learn from them again in the future. Thank you very much. The conference will continue tomorrow and start at 10. There are 10 more presentations tomorrow. Please don't miss it, and we hope to see you all again tomorrow. Thank you, and have a nice evening.